friends. Welcome to Season 8, Episode 336 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian, starting my 19th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is at @LMS_United. On Threads and Instagram, you can find me at School Librarians United, and on Blue Sky at SLU Podcast, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Friends, it is now my pleasure to introduce the sponsor of our podcast, Junior Library Guild. What if I told you there's a collection development service that can save you time and increase title circulation rates? Junior Library Guild does that and more. With their team of experienced media library specialists and publishing industry professionals, every title they recommend is vetted for my readers and organized into categories based on reading level and interest. Ultimately, Junior Library Guild helps my students foster a love of reading. Use the code UNITED15 to receive 15 free books in your first shipment. And now for today's episode, Horror in Our Elementary Collection, and my conversation with Jose.cruz. Jose.cruz, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Amy.
So we're in for a treat, friends. Jose, would you please introduce yourself, tell us about your library, the grades you serve, and some of the programs you offer?
Sure thing. I am a media specialist at Peace River Elementary. That's in Port Charlotte, Florida, which is in Charlotte County. It's a small district. If you know your Florida geography, it's sandwiched between Sarasota County, which of course hosts the city of Sarasota, and then Lee County to the south, which is the home of Fort Myers. So we're on that southwest Florida Gulf Coast, and that is where I work. Peace River is actually a year-round school, so we actually start a little early in July. We get that month of June off, and then we head back mid-July. Students come back, and then we have nice little breaks scheduled throughout the year. We serve pre-kindergarten through 5th grade. I really only just see kindergarten through 5th grade. This here now is my 4th year as a school librarian. The previous 7 years, I was actually working in public libraries. For about 4 of those, I was just a CSR, customer service representative. And then for those last 2.5, 3-ish odd years, I actually got my certification, my MLIS, to become an official public librarian, where I worked in youth services. And then I just kind of found my way to school libraries just because that's what I wanted to do. And a driving force behind that was actually listening to School Librarians United, which essentially just convinced me to take that path. So here I am, 4 years. My first 2 years at the school, we were on a specials rotation along with art and PE, music, and the rest. At the end of my 2nd year, I successfully advocated with our new principal to take me off the specials rotation so that we could go to an entirely flexible schedule. And what that entails now, this is just our 2nd year doing it. What I do is at the beginning of the year, I sit down with the grade levels and I ask them, when can I have you come in for an express 15-minute checkout? I want to schedule this. I want to make it a regular thing, because the thing about flexible schedules, you can hand teachers these nice, colorful, laminated library hall passes, and then they sit on their desk or sit in a dusty corner and never get used. So my point is to have the flexibility to have the kids come in basically whenever they need to get the resources that they want or require, but to also make sure that we don't have any large swaths of the population falling through the cracks so that there's coming in on that steady schedule, and we're just kind of ingraining the library into the community mindset all the more. So this is our second year of doing that, and it's had a dramatic effect on our culture and our circulation, I think.
Wow. I can't remember the last time I talked to somebody who teaches year round.
Yeah.
And I can see how families are big fans of year-round school. I think that, people who've been in education and stuck in my ways, it would be a very interesting transition for somebody like me to make that leap. On the other hand, boy, I got to tell you, we go back to school, we've been back for a week, but we won't have a significant break till Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, working from August until late November without really any days off, I think we have election day off, but it might be PD. I mean, it's brutal. And that really does create fatigue for everybody involved. So, I see there are a lot of fantastic redeeming qualities to going year round, but boy, the first couple of times you make that transition, I imagine there's going to be some pushback on the part of families.
Yeah, honestly, everybody, this is my one and only school that I've ever worked at. And I don't even know for how long it's been this way. We're one of 3 elementary schools that are year-round in our county, and those are the only schools in the county that are year-round. And I know that we have a fair amount of transitional families that, go to our school for a couple months and then maybe go to one of the other schools that isn't year-round, and then maybe sometimes they end up back at our school. And I've never heard anything through the grapevine that it's, been a huge ordeal for anybody. But like you were saying, it's huge for staff. It's a really nice schedule because, instead of doing that marathon from the beginning of the year to Turkey Week, we get 2 weeks at the end of October, which on the one hand, it's like, oh, I can't really do my Halloween thing at the school level full force, but at the same time, I get to enjoy Halloween all by myself at home.
Well, and forgive me, but I've worked in schools where we weren't allowed to do Halloween. And, we've had a request from families who do not observe and they're Jehovah's Witnesses. And they've said, you know what, if you're going to do Halloween, we're just going to pull our kids from school that week. And so really,
Right.
I guess the long and the short is there's no way to please everybody. But I'll tell you what, I sure think your schedule sounds amazing.
It's not bad.
Yeah, and also as a librarian, you don't have those real big, long, extended times when kids they don't have regular access to a library because as much as we'd love our kids to use the library in the summer, especially those of us who have a traditional, June to August, September summer vacation, we've got kids who will not pick up a book unless they're in school.
Yeah, that's very true. So it does help.
Jose, you and I met in person we were in Tampa in December of 2024 at FAME at this conference. It was amazing. I'm so glad that you reached out with your episode idea because, friends, that's how anybody who says, hey, how do you get to be on the show? Well, volunteering is really big. Simply saying, hey, I've got a great presentation on a certain particular topic, and maybe we could talk about it with your guests. Absolutely. Thank you. Volunteering is the best way to guarantee that you're going to be right there and in the queue for the episode. So thank you, Jose, for doing this. I'm grateful for all the many resources you have shared. Friends, you're not going to want to miss our show notes. They're absolutely packed. So I have to ask you, Jose, going to FAME, that's a fantastic conference.
Yeah, that was my second time that I had the chance to go. My very first year that I was a school librarian, I had the chance to go to that FAME conference, and there's a great picture of me. I think it was right around the time of Neil Schusterman's speech that I dragged myself with my bag full of stuff into the room, and my colleagues took a picture of me just like collapsed in my chair. Because I've been to conventions and things like that, but man, there was just something about it that it was just so eventful and, so much to process, especially that first year, where you're just learning the job. But to anybody out there who is in that position where you're in your first year and that state conference is coming up, by all means go. It's just amazing to immerse yourself in the work that you're doing. And as is said so many times on this show, you're the only one in your building that does what you do. So to immerse yourself in this whole practically statewide community and to hear what other people are doing, it's phenomenal. And just to shill for Amy for a little bit here, what happened at that FAME conference where I met her, she was actually our keynote speaker. And later that day, it was at a presentation. I don't remember what it was, but, I was sitting there waiting for it to get started. And who walks in through the door but Amy? And she sits right behind me. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I love her show so much. I need to say something. What do I do? What do I say? And, there's no perfect thing. So at some point, I just kind of turned in my chair and I said, I just wanted to say that I used to work in public libraries and your show was like the driving force behind me coming to school libraries. And if anybody ever has the chance to encounter Amy, never be afraid to say hello because she immediately started digging into her box of goodies and she's handing me buttons and she's handing me stickers. She's got a big smile on her face and we just started chatting a little bit right before the presentation and then we started chatting on her way out of the presentation. So Amy is like the friendliest person you could possibly bump into at any conference. So if she comes to your town, definitely say hello.
Well, and what you failed to mention is that I'm very loud. Very loud. And I'm not quiet and I have no problem speaking up. And I appreciate that. I usually, sometimes people hear me before they see me. And that has happened as well. So that's very sweet. Unfortunately, I can have a rather aggressive personality. And I find that there's something incredibly freeing about being at a school library conference because it is the one time, I can count the number of times on my hand that I will be surrounded by school librarians and I just feel like I'm in such a friendly space. So yes, it took me 5 years before I made it to my own state conference because taking that time off of work was such a headache.
Yeah.
My library was trashed. It was a disaster. I was like, why would I ever leave this space if that's what's going to happen? But it was so it's an investment in ourselves as professionals.
Absolutely.
Jose, you're amazing because talking about horror is... And then with your expertise in elementary and taking those two and combining them, I'm going to be perfectly honest. There are so many people for whom, this is an area that is woefully underdeveloped in our own collections. And I thought it was really going to be awesome as a high school librarian. Now I'm just like, oh, good. I can now have a horror section. You dummy. You should have been having a horror section the whole time. I had a very small section, which I've described in episodes in the past as it just has a couple little ghosts or something. And it just says, this shelf will give you nightmares or something like that. Like, warning, this shelf will give you nightmares. We've had this conversation because, friends, if you check these books out, you need to understand these are scary. And I went about it the whole way. That was the wrong way to go about it. I should have been encouraging my students rather than being concerned about parental backlash, which is why Jose is here. So I am so grateful. I'd love to know, at what point in your work as an elementary librarian did you recognize that building a horror collection for your elementary kids was really, it was a priority?
Well, you could say since birth, because I've been a lifelong fan of the genre. From the time I was very small, even before I knew it was a category or a genre unto itself, I was just somebody who had a visceral emotional response to just a Scooby-Doo image of bats fluttering out of an old house, against a full moon. There was just something in me that responded to that. And ever since then, I've just kind of cared for and cultivated that interest and that side of myself. So as a reader, that's how I entered the domain of literature, was through Goosebumps. It's because I was so desperate to understand what these super popular books were all about that I actually forced myself to read through those first few chapter books. And then after that, we were off to the races. And then as far as these ideas about building up a certain collection or categorizing things in this sense. What I showed in my slides that I presented with Amy was just showing the horror section naturally, but Amy may not realize this, that my whole library is actually set up this way. I have a K-2 side of my library and I have a 3-5 side of my library, and for the most part they all have corresponding genres and categories. That pretty much started when I was working at the public library. For the longest time, I was so immersed in the programming side of things. Like, I liked putting on the big events and the big shows and getting the families to come out and, oh, aren't we having a great time? We got music and we got these special presenters. And then, so many years into that, it slowly started dawning on me as people were coming up to the desk and asking me questions about the books on the shelves. I was like, oh, wait a minute. I have no idea what's actually here. And that's what people expect of me. Which is a whole nother topic that perhaps we'll get into another time. But that kind of is what was the catalyzing event. And then for those last few years I was at the library, I was just trying my hardest to basically fight the system, because everything within our county public libraries had to be uniform with how we labeled the books and cataloged them and put them on the shelves. But I was desperately trying to buck against that system, because I was saying that, well, this is all well and good for us, the people who work here. It's easy for us to shelve the books, but it's incredibly hard, if not impossible, for the patrons to find things that they're looking for, for the most part, author's last name, that doesn't matter. You'd be lucky if a kid knows Dave Pilkey's name, if anything. It doesn't matter what the author's name is. They should be grouped by interests, by categories. They need to be able to access this collection. So long story short, kept trying to buck that system for the last few years and failed for the most part. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to the schools now, and I'm going to do what I can there. So that's what I ended up doing. A very long process. Had to weed through what was already there and move books around and make your decisions about genreification and all of that. But of course, horror being my pet subject, that was probably the first area that I started working on, just because it was something that I was personally passionate about. But I also knew that students, by and large, are always wondering, where do you keep the scary books, Mr. Cruz? Where are they? So that was kind of how it all started.
And we're going to go into a little more detail about this in a bit, but this idea of breaking your elementary collection into an upper elementary and a lower elementary is huge because, anybody who's taught elementary, I've taught 14 years of elementary, and there were preschoolers in there too. So we had 3 and 4-year-olds in a collection where we also had 11-year-olds, and you go from pre-readers to very capable readers. But we're going to put them all together in these, organize them all together. No, it really defies logic. And I find it really eye-opening that the real problem you had was doing this at the public library, because having never worked in a public library, I would have assumed that doing something at the public library would be a piece of cake because,
Oh my God. No. Oh no. The complete opposite. The complete opposite is true, because you have all these people that you basically have to go through, and our collection development was centralized. Like, we had the library administration hub, so it had to go like before the high judges up there on their pedestals, like, well, we tried genreification once and we didn't like it, so that's out. Next. So, yeah, it was a journey.
I'm so glad. It sounds like you've landed well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the important thing, is that you did a lot of introspection. You did a little soul searching. And more importantly, you listened to the sage advice of school librarians on a weekly basis who really did sort of, we won. Friends, we got Jose, we won. One of the things I want to talk about right away is this idea of the value that horror brings for our readers, because it's not enough, as we all know, kids can love something, But if we can't identify the value that it brings to our students, sometimes if we have to turn around and then explain, why are we providing horror? When those administrators want to know, how are we spending that budget? When those teachers want to know, why are these kids walking into my room with scary books? They should be reading books that have value and information. So let's, and I don't have to convince you because you are a lifelong reader of horror. But for somebody like myself who is actually rather new to it, and I do love this, Capstone made an infographic, which is in your presentation. Thank you, Capstone, for providing some very solid justification for why readers benefit from reading horror even at an early age. There are obvious reasons, but let's go through them just for the benefit of our listeners tuning in. So first of all, let's talk about, how does horror build resilience?
So many stories, many narratives, especially at the elementary level, well, I would say of just many horror narratives in general, even for adults, cinema and all other kinds of media, most horror narratives show a journey of overcoming something. Maybe it's a fear that the main character already possessed. Maybe it's some new invasive force, and they just have to figure out a way to deal with that. So, especially when you put kids in the driver's seat in a horror story written for kids, they're looking at this and they're seeing somebody go through this, a fantastical ordeal, because let's be honest, there are real, in the domain of realistic fiction, the things that those kids are going through are a lot more real. But the horror genre kind of allows for the fantastical, metaphor. So it's not maybe, I'm really scared of swimming because I'm afraid that I'm not gonna, do very well. Okay, well, we're gonna literalize that and say that there's a monster swimming in the ocean, and now you have to contend with that. So when kids see kids in these stories tackling these huge problems, it's very empowering for them.
How about understanding? As it pertains to our students, relatability, but what does it mean to have horror help our students build understanding?
When I actually see that word in the context of the horror genre, what that means to me is that these narratives, albeit however, dark or morbid they may seem on the surface, like excessively so, they are, in their own little covert way perhaps, building our kids' understanding that not everything in life is nice, and scary things can happen at times. But then through that resilience element, these scary things, this too shall pass. You will overcome this if you have the tenacity and the bravery to do so. So that's what the understanding piece means to me, is to kind of take them gently by the hand, for the most part gently, and show them that, there are things in the woods out there, and you should do your best to travel well through that wooded path.
How about control? Because this is, to me, this one, I was like, well, how does reading horror helps my students build this understanding of control over themselves?
I think over the situation, because, we mentioned before the example of, maybe a child who is going through divorce or some other traumatic event. They don't have any control over that. Little people don't get a say in really anything, of that magnitude that happens in their lives. It's pretty much the domain of adults. But when they're engaging with a story, if they say to themselves, you know what, I think I want to step away from this, or I only want to read this much, they have that control. They can press on the brakes anytime they want. They can disengage with it anytime they want. They can't necessarily do that with something that's happening in their life. Well, of course, to a point. But that thing in their life is still there, whether they choose to engage with it or not. But a book, a story, whether, it is in the pages of a chapter book or if it's a movie or what have you, they can press pause. They can stop anytime they want. So it gives them that sense of control of, I'm in the driver's seat here.
Well, and I do like this last one, confidence, because I think that that's not necessarily unique to horror. I think there are a lot of genres that our students read where reading itself gives the students an opportunity to build some of that self-confidence.
Yeah, the act of reading is a huge confidence builder. That's what it was like for me when I tried muscling my way through those first few Goosebumps books, not just for the fact that, ooh, they were spooky stories, but of course just the act of those were the first real chapter books of that size that I tackled at that time, and reading was not easy for me. To take the words on the page and process them in my little brain and make the pictures inside my head. I felt like I was literally sweating in that seat just trying to work my way through those books. So, of course, reading in of itself builds the confidence in that light, but also in empathizing with the main character of the story, it's building their own confidence. Like, wow, I kind of took this journey with them, and look, it's the end, or that's the final page. I made it. I did it with them. So the horror genre offers that extra boost of confidence. That look, you faced the beast. You did whatever it was that the main character did, and maybe this was a book that you were kind of nervous or scared about reading, but you made it. You're here. Congratulations. So it has that little extra dose of confidence there as well.
Important qualities that we want to foster in our young people, and how better to do that than in the pages of a book. What
exactly.
educator is going to argue with that? I'm sorry. Let's not ignore perhaps the most important and driving reason to build a horror collection in our elementary libraries, and that is student demand. Our students ask for these books, and I think I've shared the story before when the Stephen King's It came out, the movie. All of the students, regardless of age, in my elementary school bragged that, of course, they got to see the movie. Nobody bragged about reading the book, but they all bragged about getting to, what is it that you got to see this weekend? Well, I got to watch it. And so I had these little 6 and 7-year-olds asking me for my Pennywise collection. Mrs. Herman, where do you put the Pennywise books? And as somebody who does not watch horror, I knew, though, that this was a character from It, and I knew that we were not going to have it. And I said, I'm really sorry. We do have some other scary books in the library, but I do not have Stephen King's It here for you. But again, the kids are asking for scary books. And therefore, that should be one of the factors that drives this as a priority when it comes to purchasing each year.
Absolutely. And, it's kind of funny because when we start talking about horror in this context, like, well, the kids are asking for it. And also with the last question, like, what is the value of horror? These are great questions to ask and to answer, but I find it funny because the general public doesn't normally feel the need to ask these questions of other genres. And as a lifelong fan, I can't help but sit off to the sidelines and kind of snicker that horror has to go through, this obstacle course to prove its worth to people when it accomplishes the same things that other types of stories do. It's just that, the aesthetics are a little grimmer, a little darker, but that's what kind of trips people up about them. It's like, oh God, look at the, grimacing clown on the cover, and oh, there's a doll with like broken eyes. Like, ew, that's creepy. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's what it's supposed to do. A funny book looks funny. So a creepy book should look creepy, but they're doing the same things. They have the same kind of value. And that's the thing too, is that when it comes to horror, the kids are asking for it. And one of the things about the genre is that it attracts the lifers, such as myself, the people who will consume just about anything and everything that, has the trappings of a horror story on it. But it also attracts what I call the toe dippers. These are the kids that maybe the only time they engage with a ghost story is when they swap them during a sleepover, or they watch, like you were referring to, oh, there's a big blockbuster, a big horror blockbuster that's come out, and now that's just kind of on everybody's radar. So that'll engage the toe dippers too. But the thing that's pulling both of those camps in and everybody in between is that visceral thrill that you get from a good horror story. In the same way that you get a visceral reaction to those funny books, everybody checks out Wimpy Kid because it makes them laugh. People want to get the inverse, if you will, of that and get a little shudder from a horror book.
I get your point. I mean, for students who are looking for that thrill, horror is definitely going to tap something, which, especially when you realize there are a lot of parents who are not going to let their kids watch Stephen King's It. Or maybe they are. I mean, I don't know. I'm really excited that we brought in an expert when it comes to elementary because, friends, we're going to also include in this conversation recommendations for our littles, for our kindergarten to second grade, and then for our sort of upper elementary, our third grade to fifth grade, because there is an important distinction in just what scary is versus spooky.
Yes. And to what you were saying earlier, when you have something, like a cultural phenomenon that's geared to adults like it, and all of a sudden you have this sudden surge of kids who are asking you for Pennywise books. Well, as a librarian, what we do in situations like that, what I try to do is, okay, I don't have, well, in my case, I do have one book on Pennywise, but we'll get to that later. I try to find a correlative, a read-alike. So, okay, so you're asking me for Pennywise. I don't have Pennywise, but I do have books that were written with you in mind that have creepy clowns in them. So I can't get you exactly the thing that you're looking for, but if you like this kind of thing, it is out there. And that's where we have to kind of work a little harder to serve those needs, is to find those read-alikes that are a good match for the kids, because otherwise they're just going to keep demanding what the cool new thing for adults or teens is at the moment.
Well, and I do like the point you mentioned in our notes, because it's not unusual for kids to ask for a book, not because they genuinely are curious, but because they are copying the behavior of their peers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's honestly in much the same way like we talked about how, well, it's the same way for the horror genre as it is for anything. You could say that about other series too. Does that kid actually like Wimpy Kid? Does that kid actually like Dork Diaries? Or did they get it because their friend was jazzed about finding it on the shelves? And the thing is, we won't know until they bring it back and say whether they liked it or not. Maybe that will end up being their gateway, and they'll find out that, wow, I actually really do love Dork Diaries, or I do love Goosebumps. So, the best thing that we can do is just serve the need that's being presented to us in the moment. Like, okay, you're telling me that you want a creepy clown book. I've never seen you vaguely interested in this area before, but you know what? Here you go, and get back and let me know what you think. And if you do end up liking it, we'll get the next thing. And if you don't, we'll move on. So just serving the need in the moment.
I've got to ask, because there are a lot of listeners who are tuning in, school librarians who support our youngest patrons, who might be understandably nervous about ordering horror for their elementary collections. So what would you say to somebody who is really concerned about using those precious budget allocation to buy something that might be perceived as a little risky?
Yeah, totally. Well, even as a lifelong horror devotee, I will say, as a school librarian, that if there are any of you out there who are nervous about the prospect of purchasing horror or spooky titles for your collection, your worries are entirely, I don't want to say warranted. It's understandable that you would feel that way, especially given the climate that many of us are working in right now. We don't want to take any extra chances than we already are just by doing the bare minimums of our jobs related to collection development, where it seems like the most innocuous title could potentially, rain heavenly fire on you and your media program. It's completely understandable if you feel nervous around this topic. Horror is my thing, and that's a thing a lot of people are nervous around, but I have things that I'm nervous about. I also try to purchase manga for my collection, and that's a bit of a sweaty ordeal sometimes. Like, I try to follow the ratings on the books as best as I can, but then sometimes things just come through. So if that's what your worry is, like, I thought this would be a good book for the collection, but it ends up maybe scaring one of my patrons, or it has a level of perhaps violence that I didn't anticipate. I didn't see that in the reviews. Just as you would approach it with any book from any genre that had that kind of impact on your patrons or your collection, just be transparent. I've had students who've brought copies of manga to me, like, Mr. Cruz, can you look at this? And I take a peek and I'm like, oh, okay, well, thank you very much for bringing this to my attention. I will attend to that. And by attending to it, I knock on the door of my neighboring middle school and say, hey, I have something for you now. Here you go, free books. And that's just what happens sometimes. Be transparent with your kids. Let them know that they can come to you if they are concerned about anything. And especially at the elementary level, oh boy, will they are all too happy, to let you know, like, I think Amy said in different episodes, this word has HE double hockey sticks in it. Like that, that kind of thing happens, and it's okay. Just make the atmosphere of your media center open and welcoming for kids to bring those kinds of concerns to you. And, to the extent that you're able, make it welcoming and open for parents and families to bring those kinds of concerns to you. I actually just had an incident. This is anticipating a question that came up later in Amy's list here, but she asked if there's ever been any parental or teacher pushback. And initially, when I first saw that question, I said, oh man, we haven't had any issues whatsoever. We're fine. That'll be an easy question to answer. Well, I think literally 2 days later, I had a patron. So I mentioned a little while back that, I do have a Pennywise book. So, and it's, this series is in the presentation. It's from Abdo, and it's called Hollywood Monsters. And they have a series that covers like older cinematic monsters like the Mummy and Mr. Hyde. But then they have a newer slate that includes Chucky, Pennywise, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers. So I had checked out one of the Chucky books to a first grader, which, yes, I do have a K-2 side and a 3-5 side in my library. We stick to those when it's time for the express 15-minute checkout during those class visits. We stick to those sides, especially for the K-2 kids. I say, nope, we're just stay on this side of the room. However, when they come in with their hall passes, or if it's in the morning before class begins, I let them have free range. And for the most part, it's fine. Well, this one first grader happened to check out this Chucky book. And then I was informed by the front desk a day or so later that, our little friend who got this book is having nightmares now. And his mother has asked if there's any way that he could be kept from checking more of these books out. And I had gotten just like the thumbnail an hour or two before I got the full story. So I was sweating for a little bit, like, oh my goodness, what are these parents going to ask of me? How are they going to react? But in this case, it was a bit of a softball where they were merely just asking that their child, and only their child, not the whole school, be kept from borrowing these materials. So, and guess what? We're fine. I've seen the kids since then. I've, run into the parents at dismissal since then, and everybody's fine. It's just, we're all on the same understanding now. So as long as you convey that, hey, no problem, we'll take care of this, that welcoming, open environment that I mentioned, convey that to your kids, convey that to your parents, and that should ideally steamroll most bigger issues that might happen otherwise.
I did 14 years. I counted it. I've taught in, I believe, 11 elementary schools.
Whoa.
And, well, what happened was...
Well, you were traveling librarian,
Yeah, I was
right?
traveling librarian,
Yeah.
Yep. So I taught in one elementary school for 7 years. And then the next 7 years, I taught in a district. I was a traveling librarian. I guess I taught in 9 elementary schools there. So it was a total of 10 elementary libraries. 10 elementary libraries in 14 years. And I would teach in 4 at a time. Never did I teach in a library that had a K-2 side and a 3-5 side. And I'm thinking this would have been a real game changer for a lot of reasons, especially when it came to our students really just migrating towards all of those massive chapter books that our 4th and 5th graders are reading. And then having, those were some fairly complicated checkouts because you have these individual conversations pertaining to individual students, but you've got an entire school worth of individual students and their families and those expectations about you really don't want to be those gatekeepers, but you want to make sure that you're supporting the students and their reading interests, but also being respectful at the same time. If I had the pleasure of walking into your library, it would be such a thrill. Every once in a while, friends, we get to see those tours. If you go to AASL or you go to a state conference and somebody does a tour of their space, it's absolutely fantastic. I have my phone out. I look like a tourist and I'm taking pictures because I want to get all these ideas. So I love when people share pictures of their actual space because I really feel like I'm a tourist in this space. I'm looking at it with my librarian eyes because I see things that, probably your educators have no awareness or appreciation for the work that you put into this. Because you have done the work. When you have divided your collection into a K2 and a 3-5, you have done an extraordinary amount of work and able to create sort of mirror collections that represent a growing ability to understand more complex ideas and developed language skills. Would you please explain to me the difference between spooky, which is your K2 side, and scary, which is your older elementary side? What makes those so different and importantly so?
Sure. So part of the whole K2, 3-5 divide, I didn't mention this earlier, kind of came from necessity as much as just what I wanted to do. That was really born when I was still seeing classes on the specials rotation. And yeah, kind of like you mentioned, it just got so hard to farm and keep an eye on the kids when they had the whole room to search for. So not only was it difficult for them to find things, but it was also difficult for me to keep track of them and to help them. So I'm like, you know what? We're just staying on this side of the room for this grade band, and we're just staying on this side of the room for that grade band. And I've actually listened to other episodes from the show here that have talked about just, genre-fied libraries that are fully integrated. It's just one scary section. It's just one fantasy section, and it's got the books for everybody. And I do like that, especially for the older readers, because I have a good amount of kids in 3 to 5 who have no qualms about going over to what they adorably call the kids section. It's like, you're a kid. What are you talking about? But they have no qualms going over there. I make it a very acceptable thing to go over there. But I think it may be a little bit more of an obstacle for other kids who are maybe struggling with reading and they don't want the further stigmatization. So I do, in theory, like the idea of a fully integrated library where everybody can just go to the one area, they can shop to their heart's content, and they don't have to worry about labels or anything like that. But it was really born of necessity, and I do like it this way. And on another point is that it allows us to laser in our focus and really explore this side of the collection. That's what I tell some of the second graders who start getting disgruntled and, we want to go over there. But it's like, guys, there are so many books over here that you haven't even seen yet. So I like that it, as you say, it gives them the chance to really build
confidence. I think this is also about being confident, about being capable readers. And if you're always reading something, I remember getting some emails from some very grateful parents who were like, please stop checking books out to my child that I have to read to them. It's like, yeah. And I just, it is, oftentimes that also requires a certain amount of communication with the classroom teacher because you do have these precocious readers who will be reading considerably above grade level, but in fairness, do not understand what they're reading.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
While they are able to read it, it's going over their heads. And you and I know that. There's a balancing act because you want to make sure that you've got kids who are strengthening their own reading skills and not putting that expectation on the parent when they go home.
Right. And so to address the question you asked about how are things set up, that is why when I built these sections on each corresponding side, I wanted to make a point to have a variety of formats, a variety of titles to present to these kids to show them that, this topic, this genre encompasses all of these things. So on the K-2 side, I called it spooky. That's the only section that I renamed from the corresponding one on the 3-5 side, just because part of me was like, these the kindergartners don't shop the shelves; they do something else. But these first graders who are kindergartners plus a summer, to borrow Amy's phrase, I didn't want them to see a section called scary and to literally be scared off. So I wanted to convey that, hey, this is where like the ooky and the spooky stuff lives without making it seem like, I'm coming to get you, right? Or the books are coming to get you. They're going to eat you. So the signs I created in Canva on the K-2 side, all the signs just show like the name of the section, in this case spooky, and like 4 icons. So the spooky sign has like a little ghosty and a little monster and a little witch hat and a haunted house. And then on the 3-5 side, it's called scary. And this is the way all the signs on the 3-5 side work. It just has a central image. In this case, on the scary side, it's a cool thing I found on Canva where it's like a black cat that has like a twisted neck. So it's like, that's the perfect measure of grimness, I think, to convey to these kids. And then on the 3-5 scary sign, as well as all the other signs on the 3-5 side, are keywords, phrases that kids may use to identify what they are looking for. So the scary sign has like horror and paranormal and monsters, like, those trying to go into like the search engine optimization mindset of when kids ask for this kind of stuff, what kind of thing are they asking for? So they see the keywords on the sign and they're like, oh, that's actually what I was looking for. I didn't realize it was in the scary section. Let me go there. So then on each side, to varying degrees, we have a mix of materials. On the K-2 side, it's predominantly picture books. There's like a little smattering of early chapter books, beginning chapter books, and like a pinch of nonfiction. I have nonfiction on both sides. And in building this section in particular, I've applied this discipline to all the other areas of the library. But for me personally, it was so satisfying to do this for the horror sections because as a kid myself, going to the library, I would have wanted nothing more than to see a section like this because if you follow the generic categorization systems where you got your alphabetical authors and you got your Dewey, your cryptids and your ghosts that are in the early 00s of Dewey are nowhere near your Goosebumps books, but they should be. So what I've striven to do is to make for each genre, each area, one-stop shop. Any kid who's interested in anything creepy, here are all my creepy books. My goal as a librarian is to make things for my patrons as painfully easy and obvious for them to find materials on the shelves. That was the thing that I was striving for at the public library, but I kept getting shot down. And I'm like, it needs to be easy for the kids. It needs to be easy for the shoppers because they need to be able to find something that they may want. The idea is to promote reading and to build their confidence, build their knowledge of what is out there, not to build their knowledge of a system. If the system is getting in the way of building those other things, the system needs to change. So, and even if it's a system that I do, that system needs to change if it's getting in the way of kids finding this stuff. So that's kind of the discipline that we've applied.
I thinking about when we did our Halloween displays, all of those things came up and out. And you'd put out your Halloween crafts, Halloween cookbooks, Halloween how to draw. You'd go through Halloween as a holiday being, I'm thinking about all the things we pulled out of our collection and then put on full display for a month. Maybe going in until you switched out for Thanksgiving, which was always a disappointment in my collection. I had cookbooks that were Halloween themed. I had, how to draw books. I had craft books that were all Halloween crafts. But it was fun. But again, you've got them in all these disparate parts of the collection, including, as you said, the paranormal and the cryptids and the looking at our nonfiction collection and our Dewey. It was all over the place. It was scattered. So no, I love that you're embracing this genre across all the different formats. And as it comes out in our nonfiction as well, you're putting the student's needs first. Like you're student centering this experience and looking at it as a student would, not as a strict interpreter of Dewey.
No, absolutely.
Friends, I will say you don't want to miss this presentation because it is shopping lists galore. And while I'm not going to spend any time talking about series, I'm looking at this more from an administrative perspective as a librarian. I'm going to leave the shopping to you. How do you book talk your scary books? I know that a story time with creepy carrots would be easy, doing those story times. But when you're talking about this section with your students, because it is out, this isn't just a Halloween display. This is out all year long. What does that lesson look like with your littles?
To be honest, I haven't really book talked horror specifically or, titles from those sections all that much. It's one of those areas that more or less sells itself, as we've talked about, because that visceral thrill is inherent in most of the materials on those shelves. If I notice that a particular series is kind of being left off to is being cast off to the wayside, I might bring it out during a class visit. And I've just started doing this now where I say, hey, I know that especially for my 3 to 5 kids, they've gone to that section quite a few times, especially the 5th graders. But I tell them there are things that we still miss. And I noticed that nobody has checked out this series called Erie Elementary. Let me tell you a little bit about that. So that's kind of the approach that I take. Sometimes, more often than not, what happens is, Mr. Cruz, I'm looking for a scary book, or my favorite question of all, when the 3 to 5 kids come up and say, where are all your jump scares at? And I just kind of look at them like, you do know how books work, right? You can't really get a jump scare from a book, but I guess I get where you're coming from, so let me see if I can do my best to match up with what you're asking for. You're looking for something on that level. That's how I try to interpret the question instead of literally like, oh, where's the book where I turn the page and the monster jumps out at me? I would love it if there were things like that. That would be amazing. But at any rate, what usually ends up happening is, Mr. Cruz, what's the scariest book you got in here? Show it to me. I want to take on the challenge. This is basically the interaction here. And I tell them, well, and it's the same kind of exchange as, Mr. Cruz, what's your favorite book here? Well, I have several favorites, but what's your all-time favorite? Well, guys, I can tell you what I like, what, I think is cool, but that may not be what you think is cool. So the more important question to ask here is, what kind of story, what kind of thing would you like today? And they have to think for a little bit. But if they're just asking for general recommendations, I just kind of scan the shelves and I'll, pull a little title out and say, oh, I read this and I really liked it. It had a really unexpected ending, or I just love the format that this story was told in. And I just kind of give them the quick real estate agent tour of the shelves, like, oh, here are a couple, and now you pick from that. And that's really what the majority of the book talking for horror is. And that's mostly for my 3 to 5. K to 2, they just kind of eagerly take whatever looks good on those shelves. I don't have to sway them or, pump up one thing or another. They just kind of, wow, candy, kind of like Halloween candy. They just go up and grab it from the bowl.
I remember when I taught in elementary, you had plenty of helpers, plenty of kids who were like, I'll go get them a book. I'll go get, and you always have these students who are happy to show off just how well they know your collection. And absolutely, there's nothing that sells a book more than having the students promote it to their peers. And I'm going to tell you the same is true at high school, where my students are absolutely, they come in and their friends are dragging them and said, no, you've got to read this book. And that's why I try to buy 2 to 3 copies of everything I've got so that everybody can buddy read, because that's still a thing in high school, friends.
That's cool.
I do have to ask, we've talked a little bit about concerns by family, and I'm not going to lie, I've always worked in schools where teachers were happy to give me their opinions on the collection I was building. I've had teachers who were absolutely going to share with me what they thought about the books I was buying. When you get pushback from your colleagues, have you managed to deflect any of that when inquiring minds come in? And it's a little hard because you don't hide the scary books in your collection. You've made it very clear this is a showcase piece of your collection. I have no doubt you've featured the other genres in your collection, the other areas that you've built out, but you're not exactly hiding the scary books when you walk into the library.
Yeah, exactly. To be honest, I've been lucky, I guess you could say. I've not really had any pushback from administration or teachers. Honestly, that one incident with the Chucky book was the only time where I had somebody raise a level of skepticism. It was actually one of our security monitors, because I guess he just happened to be at the desk when this parent approached and explained the situation. So he was the one that I heard about the situation first. And I think I was headed to the front office and he was headed out, and he just kind of looks at me and laughs. He was like, "Chucky book, huh?" And no context whatsoever. And I just look at him like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh yeah, we just said, and he explained the thumbnail, and I started getting nervous. I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, I guess I'll find out what that's about." And, he made a passing reference to, they said, they mentioned, he just kind of made some vague reference to some gratuitous material that was in the book. And I'm like, I didn't know how to respond. So I gave kind of an awkward shrug of well, yeah, that's what those books talk about. But in the case of that particular book, for anybody who's curious or worried about the Hollywood Monster series from Abdo, in the case of Chucky, the most gratuitous thing that book mentions, it does refer to Chucky. The doll is possessed by the spirit of a serial killer. So it does use that phrase. And then later on, these books, by the way, are just full of fun facts. They're not recounting point by point the narratives of these movies. So it's not going into great detail. But then it mentioned a fun fact later in the book that the name of the character, the serial killer character from the Child's Play series, derived his name from 3 notorious killers: Charles Manson, Lee Harvey Oswald, and James Earl Ray. And then it shows a picture of Charles Manson in handcuffs. But that's, that may be enough for some people. Okay, I'm never getting that book. But that's as far as it goes. It's really just hey, trivia, isn't this interesting? But it doesn't go any further than that. But that's really been it. Yeah.
Forgive me, but these are families who also have no problem handing their kids an internet-enabled phone.
Oh, don't get me started.
Zero supervision.
Yeah. Don't get me started.
And you're just going to let them sit over there for hours. Okay, we're going to worry about this book that I have on the shelf that your child may or may not pick up. We'll look at the pictures for sure. But whether or not they're actually reading any of it, that might be a bridge too far. Anyway, I digress. This is a friendly, listening audience, and we've all of us are nodding our heads going, yep. Been there, done that. Absolutely. And these families are convinced that it is the book that is the problem and not the internet and the phone that they just gave their kid for their birthday. So,
right. We should all be scared of YouTube more than anything.
Thank you. Absolutely. Yep. Jose, I can't let you go without asking you, because apparently you're also a very accomplished author. You write for Capstone, and I'm very familiar with Capstone. They were sponsors for a long time. But I love the nonfiction as well as fiction that you've written for them. So let's first of all talk about your writing. You have a scary chapter book that is coming out shortly. You're writing under a pseudonym. And so would you explain the premise? Because it is in the context of, today's conversation, it is a horror book. And I'll let you take it from there.
Sure. So I started up with Capstone, just reaching out to them. I'm actually on hiatus with them as I'm working on some other projects, but I had the opportunity to do a couple of work for hire assignments for them. Started out with some nonfiction assignments. My first one was a book on conspiracy theories, and then I did some on ancient civilizations. And then they actually tapped me to do a couple of entries from their fairy tale journal series, which is like fractured fairy tales taken from the perspective of one of the main characters, written in like a diary or a journal format. So those were my first fiction assignments, and I had so much fun with them. And I kind of always knew in the back of my mind, I'd love to, I know that they're obviously huge proponents of scary stories. That's where, the graphic that we talked about came from. So after I did about 3 of those, I mentioned to the one editor I was in contact with, like, hey, I'm kind of a horror guy. Do you have anything coming down the pike? And the editor told me, I think I know who you should get in contact with. So she passed me on to somebody else. And sure enough, this series that they were working on, the premise is that I Am Dead, DEHD, is a very reclusive, mysterious author who lives in a house next to a cemetery, and he writes these terrifying tales for kids. So the series is all written by him, but ghostwritten, very appropriately, by schlubs such as myself. And I had the opportunity to write one entry, and it was pretty much given carte blanche, just it can be any kind of scary story. It's okay if it doesn't end very happily, but, make it a little happy. The parameters were all very general. So I basically got the chance to live one of my latent dreams since the time that I was a kid reading these Goosebumps books and basically write that kind of thing with the book, which ended up being called Nightlight. And it actually is out now. It was part of their fall 2025 slate. So that's available as well as some of the other I Am Deads. I did not write any of those other ones, but I did write Nightlight, and I'm pretty proud of it, I gotta say.
Well, and I gotta be honest, as a nonfiction fan, huge fan, you've got Would You Rather books. And the Would You Rather books, those fly off the shelf. And I made sure when I had elementary school, like you're talking grades 3 and 4 for your conspiracy series. And so friends, if you look up Jose.cruz on Capstone, you're going to get a whole bunch of books. But then also comes up I Am Dead. And that's really bizarre. I was like, "Are you I Am Dead?" And
is that you?
I was like, "I think that's you."
Are they
right?
one and the same? I've never seen Jose and I Am Dead in the same room at the same time, so I don't know.
But I'm absolutely fascinated by people who write, and I'm in awe because it's not something I'm capable of doing, or nor do I enjoy it. But it is interesting because under the subject headings for I Am Dead's Nightlight book, you've got horror, monsters, thriller, suspense, self-esteem, and self-reliance. And that's what we were talking about, how these books foster a sense of supporting our students' sort of emotional growth that's appropriate for, the grades 3 through 5. This is like your niche, like this is your wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mentioned that it was like living a dream, getting the chance to write a Goosebumps-esque story, something that some people feel was lacking in like the Goosebumps books that they grew up with was that, the characters very rarely, they were a little bit kind of like on the scaredy cat side. They didn't really face their problems so much as just kind of like, kind of stumble their way through these supernatural adventures. So it was really cool and rewarding to get the chance to write this main character, Kingston, who has this deep-seated fear of the dark. And he's put in this completely insane situation where he has to deal with these biological mutants, basically, whilst at the same time dealing with this intense fear of his. And like I said, just the way that it all came out and it culminated with like this big showdown of sorts, and he was able to overcome all these things that he was going internally, as well as the external threat of, these things are going to eat me. Spoiler alert, I guess. But it was just, it was it was a great chance to get to write that kind of story and have that empowering moment like we were talking about earlier.
Well, and I think what's fun is that for somebody who is working in the school library, the kinds of things that students are looking for, and you work directly with this audience. So who better to conceive of some of these stories than somebody who's working on the other side as the person moving these books to our young readers. I also want to mention in your show notes, you also included a link to spooky middle grade books, as well as you also included Summer Scares, which was an ALA blog post. I think Reader's Advisory for All. That's fantastic. I know, friends, the fun thing whenever we bring these experts on that they share with us resources that they have. So I appreciate it. But congratulations, published author. It's very exciting. And I highly suspect that since Capstone's figured out that you can do this, that you'll be tapped again and again, which is wonderful. And how lucky for our students.
Yeah, it was a blast. And hopefully it won't be the end of scary stories to come in the future.
Absolutely. Jose, I am so grateful that you have shared time with us. Friends, you've got shopping lists galore, and it is the beginning of the school year. This is the best way. This is the best time to be looking at this amazing presentation, because all you have to do is open up your book order that you're going to put out there, hopefully soon, and look at all these recommended series, these recommended titles, recommended authors, because Jose has done this phenomenal thing of breaking down this shopping list into K2 and the 3 to 5, and then you can start to do your homework looking at those series. I always love a list. It gives me a great deal of confidence knowing that when I make these purchases, I have the recommendation of somebody who has been doing this for a long time. Jose, I have no doubt that your expertise is going to be called upon in the future. Would you please let listeners know how we can reach out to you if we have questions about today's conversation?
Sure thing. So the most direct way to get in touch with me for professional matters is my work email. That's going to be my name, Jose Cruz, C-R-U-Z, and that's at yourcharlotteschools.net. That's the most direct way to get a hold of me. I would love to hear from listeners any questions you have or just concerns even. Please reach out to me. Obviously, this is something I love to talk about and champion. And if there's any way in which I can help you develop this side of your collection or other related matters, I'd be happy to help.
I'm very grateful for today's conversation. I think there are a lot of folks who can make some decisions about what they'd like to do going forward. Jose, it is a holiday weekend, and you've taken time out of your busy day to share your expertise with us. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for approaching me at Fame. Again, friends, when people come to me and say, hey, I've got this thing I'd love to talk to you about, this is a yes. I mean, this is how episodes come to be. And I'm so grateful that you shared this with us, especially at a time when people are getting ready to spend their budget. Mm-hmm. So I'm very excited. I know you and I will cross paths in the future. I hope you have a fantastic school year. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Amy, and happy haunting to everybody else.
Friends, if you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. If you are curious to know how often your state or country have been featured on the podcast, then simply click on the link that can be found in our show notes of every episode. Search by title, author, state, and country, and do a Command F search. I hope this is the year you consider being a guest on the show. Please visit the FAQs in every episode, and you'll realize just how easy it is. We all have something to share. Make Season 8 your time to shine. Be sure to visit the Library of Congress survey in today's show notes and share your feelings on the proposed changes to the subject headings. This survey closes on September 19th. I know your feedback is much appreciated. I hope you take a look at the link to Junior Library Guild in our show notes, use the code UNITED15, and receive 15 free books with your first shipment. Be sure to tune in next Friday, September 12th, when I am joined by Katie Moose, a school librarian in North Carolina, to discuss library inventory best practices. I hope you will tune in.